Hi, my name is Heather Merrick, and I'll be talking to you today about The First 90 Days, a discussion on Michael Watkins' best-selling book, The First 90 Days, Critical Success Strategies for New Leaders at All Levels. This is really a pertinent book for any leader who's either new to the organization but has been in a leadership role before, is new to leadership altogether, or is just being promoted within their organization, maybe into a more senior position or moving into another department. The book itself was written in 2003 and was originally published by the Harvard Business School Press, and it was intended to complement a leadership transitions program, an online portal that has a systematic and detailed approach to prepare leaders, again, at all levels, that Harvard had developed for their business school. The transitions program is still in use today, and it's widely available online and anyone has access to it, but the book can really stand alone. 13 years after its original publication, it's still a great roadmap for leaders at all levels. The premise of the book is that there's 90 days for a new leader to break even, which Watkins defines as giving as much value to the organization or the department as you receive from it. As a leader, that's about building the culture, making the changes, and also growing yourself and, again, developing as a leader. The purpose of the book is for leader and leadership development. There's definitely a difference there. Dugan and O'Shea in 2014 published a white paper jointly through SHRM and the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, Leadership Development, Growing Talent Strategically, that really defines the difference between leader development and leadership development. Leader development is growing that capability to lead effectively and be that manager or that supervisor, while leadership development is more about building on the capability of the organization to perform its tasks and achieve its mission. You don't have to be in a quote-unquote leader role or a managerial position to lead the organization. And this is also supported by Marilyn Hamilton in her 2012 article, Leadership to the Power of 8. Again, really critical difference between leader and leadership development, but Watkins' book actually applies to both. The first part of the book, the first probably 3 chapters, focus on really getting your feet wet as a leader. Again, whether you're new to the organization, the department, or the team. You need to identify the organization and the department, its structure, and what your leadership style should be for that team. There's really 4 different kinds of organizations that Watkins talked about: the startup, the turnaround, the realignment, and the sustaining success. And it's important to know that you actually do need a leadership style difference between those types of organizations, because those teams are going to interact differently and the organization's strategies are going to be different. For example, in a startup environment, you need to move quickly and you need to start building systems and structure from scratch. There's really no basis. Having a democratic style of leadership in a startup organization can lead to chaos as the organization continues to grow. And I've actually experienced that working in a startup organization. So it's important to make sure that the leader is able to make a decision and then follow through on that decision. In the turnaround situation, you need a leader who can think on their feet and can make decisions very quickly. That critical thinking ability and being able to look at the situation and say, this is what needs to happen. A lot of times in a turnaround organization, they're struggling financially. So knowing what needs to happen to either bring in the revenue or cut the costs and making those decisions quickly is something that's important. In a realignment, the leader needs to analyze the organization and figure out what's right and what's wrong and how can we make this better. Critical thinking is important, and a democratic style of leadership tends to work well when you're in a realignment situation. And the final situation that Watkins talked about, sustaining success. For many organizations, that's critical, especially as they continue to grow. When you look at an organization such as GE, who does have a very well-defined leadership program, they're really sustaining the success of the organization. They're not starting from scratch. They have those processes in place. They have the systems. They have the structure. They have a well-defined culture that their corporate office talks about in their mission and their values. It's up to the leader at all levels to say, wait, there might be a problem here in this one process. Identify that problem and then come up with a solution to fix it. And in order to do that, you need to get buy-in from everyone, whether it's your colleague that's in another department because you're on a cross-functional team, whether it's the people you're managing, and sometimes it's your boss that you need to get the buy-in from. The next part of the book, and the next probably 3 chapters, talk about making changes within the organization. And this is very, very critical for leaders at all levels and at all stages of development, whether it's in the first 90 days or it's 5 years down the road for the organization or for the leader. Making changes and change management is important to the growth of the organization and to the individual as a leader. Watkins talks about it in the context of securing early wins in the first 90 days and negotiating success. And while those are both very important, it's also important to know that change management doesn't stop after the first 90 days. You are always making changes as a leader. That's part of growing the organization and growing yourself professionally, is making sure that things are not always the status quo. There's always a way to make things better, and for continuous improvement to really work, you have to get buy-in from everyone in the organization, whether that's the team or your leaders above. Change management is something that's always talked about as this big concept, and it's one of those buzzwords in business lately. And a lot of times they talk about that, well, that's HR's responsibility to do that. And yes, HR is the keeper of the culture, and managing change in the organization and helping to overcome resistance is definitely part of the HR role. But it's not just on HR to manage those changes. If the leader says, I want to make this change in the organization, they need to make sure that first it's the right change for the organization. They need to make sure they have all of the information on hand to make a good analysis of all the facts and the situation and ensure that, yes, this is a good decision. One of the things that Owen and Dietz talk about in their 2012 article is that there's a fallacy with change management, and that a lot of times leaders are making decisions on incomplete information. And then those decisions have some pretty negative consequences because their analysis wasn't complete. How can it be when all the information isn't there? One of the myths that they talk about for change management is that change starts at the top. Yes, it does in some cases, but not always. The leader could be the first line supervisor out on the production floor in a manufacturing environment, or maybe it's just the machine operator who goes to the team leader and says, I have an idea on how we can make this process better. So then it's that person's responsibility to get their leader involved in making that change. When leadership does get involved in the changes, yes, change management does come from the top in some cases. So in some ways it's a myth from Owen and Dietz, and I agree that this is a fallacy. And in other situations, no, it's actually true. One of the other fallacies, I guess you could say, that Owen and Dietz talk about is that change is predictable. And a lot of people believe that it is. And that's a myth, according to Owen and Dietz. And I would agree. When a leader is making decisions on incomplete information, you can't predict the outcome. You can try based on the data that you have, but it's not accurate, and your prediction is probably going to be wrong because you're not making the decision on all of the facts. So this is a myth, and I agree in that situation. Watkins doesn't really address the myths of change management or go very in depth into how to manage change in his book. And that's one criticism that I would have for it. But there are a lot of other resources out there for change management that a leader could turn to if they're not sure how to get buy-in from their team and how to ensure that they've really gotten all the information that they need before they move forward. One thing that I've noticed personally, both as a leader and as a follower, is that in the first 90 days, too many changes all at once can be a really bad thing. It can upset the long-tenured employees. It can mess with the status quo. And in some cases, you do need to do that. But if you want your team to go forward with you and to make those changes and be happy about the changes you're making, it's important to ensure that they're on your side and they feel like you're on their side. If they've always done things a certain way, you need to make a good case on why they should change, whether it's their safety, revenue for the organization. It doesn't always play a big part when you're talking about your entry-level employees. They don't think about stuff like that because it doesn't affect their daily life. Sometimes they do, but that might not be the biggest motivator for change. The last part of the book talks about moving forward. It's probably 2 or 3 chapters again. There's 9 chapters total in the book. When you're moving forward, really one of the things that Watkins talks about is achieving alignment. And he has 5 different things that he thinks need to be aligned in those first 90 days. The strategy of the organization and what the leader has in mind, the structure of the department and organization, the systems that are in place need to be analyzed, the skills of the team need to be analyzed and ensure that the right people are there, and the culture of the organization or team. If there is not an alignment between the leader and the culture of the organization, it's probably not a good fit, and the leader is not going to last. Either the leader will choose to move on because there's a values misalignment there, or the organization will choose to part ways with the leader. A culture misalignment can also lead to a strategy misalignment. In the case of an organization that is very focused on sustainability, and that's part of the culture, then you have a leader come in that doesn't really care about sustainability, and they're not looking at the triple bottom line. They'll make changes to processes that won't resonate very well with the culture of the organization and the employees who truly feel that sustainability is part of their culture and it's part of the values of the organization. You get this mismatch, and when that happens, not only does it cause turmoil in the organization, but it could actually be a bad public relations campaign if something were to happen. It's important that the leader surrounds him or herself with the right people, whether that's the employees that they're working with, that's their peers, that's a mentor, that's, again, the upper leaders and the values of the organization. When you're building your team, you need to make sure that the team can truly carry out the tasks that they're supposed to be carrying out. When a new leader steps into the organization and they're coming from the outside and they have that fresh perspective, they can really assess the skills of the individuals that are in the roles and say, wait, John Jones has been in this position for 5 years, but for 4.5 of those years, we haven't been hitting our metrics, and he's been lagging on performance. What can we do to help him improve? Where's the gap? What training do we need to do to make sure that the organization can continue to grow and John can do his job effectively? And maybe the fault isn't on John. Maybe he doesn't have the resources that he needs from his leader. And the new leader can again take a look at that and say, John, what do you need to do your job better? How can I help you? And that really is part of being a servant leader. Going out and making sure that your people are taken care of and not thinking about yourself. Even if it means saying to your boss, you know what, my department is struggling and I need these resources, and they're struggling because I haven't been able to give this to them. And the next thing that Watkins talks about is making sure that you mentor others. As you go through your leadership transition and you accelerate your learning and your transition in those first 90 days and you create that roadmap, taking a look at the others in the organization and maybe the high-performing individuals that want to be put into leadership roles, tap them on the shoulder, start sending them to training, give them a path. That's part of the succession plan for the organization. It helps the organization grow. It gives the leader a place to continue moving up on, and they know that their replacement is being trained and they don't have to worry about that. He really talks about that as expediting everyone, giving everyone the opportunity to move forward and the path to success that they need. There's a lot of different strategies that Watkins talks about to build the success of the team and to really be successful in the first 90 days. And a lot of that can be carried over beyond the first 90 days to make sure that you're still being effective as a leader. As a new leader, it's a great roadmap and figuring out what do you need to do. If you've never been in a leadership role before, you've never had a mentor, you've never taken a leadership class, how do you manage people? How do you get buy-in? It doesn't come naturally. Maybe a little bit with charisma for some people, but actually managing and having that long-term success, it comes with practice. Nobody's good at it from the beginning. There's always mistakes that are made along the way. Even a tenured leader who's been in charge for 25 years, they're still going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay. You just need to recognize that maybe you made a mistake, own up to it, and make it better next time, not make that same mistake again. Watkins talks about developing leadership programs and leader development programs much the same way that Dugan and O'Shea did, and growing the organization, having that succession plan. And that's incredibly important for any organization, whether it's a 5-person organization or a 50,000 person organization. Going back to GE, they've always had a great program in place, at least as long as I have been in the working world. It's something that they take pride in, and they do a lot of trainings even for their, quote, non-leaders who are not in managerial roles but might still be leading the organization from within because they're technical and subject matter experts. The military, as one example, has some phenomenal leadership programs that they have laid out for someone who is first in a very technical position, and then they're 2 to 3 years into their military career, they're looking at getting promoted into a team leader position where you'd be overseeing maybe 5 to 10 people. There's actually a course that you have to go through. It's 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the situation, and it goes over managerial and supervisory basics, and there's also some technical stuff involved for their specific job. So they can continue to be experts in their field while also learning how to manage people at a very entry basic level. As you continue to move up in the ranks of the military, there are two, sometimes three additional leadership training programs that you can go through as you're promoted to really accelerate your learning and make sure that when you get promoted, you're ready to take on that responsibility. You can jump right in and you know what needs to happen. It's a really great example of a program that really helps develop leaders, that sense of accountability and responsibility. And a lot of organizations are starting to take on that track of, this is our first line leader and this is a leadership program that we want to send them to. And here's our plant manager, 2 steps above, and we want to send this person to maybe a situational leadership program where they can learn how to interact with all of their employees, maybe have a little bit different leadership style with everyone that they communicate with, but it's still firm, it's still fair, and it's still consistent in the application of HR policies. If the rule says you're terminated after 3 consecutive absences that you fail to call in, that needs to be applied to everyone. But the conversation that you have with the employee, maybe it's handled a little bit differently, a different tone of voice, depending on how that person receives constructive criticism and how that person receives feedback, to make sure that they're understanding and that everyone's on the same page. Some people need coaching and mentorship, and others really want to be told directions, exactly what to do and how to get there. What's going to make your people successful? And how can you be a better leader?